Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Type Directors Club and our salon this morning, this afternoon. So let's get started. BRIAR LEVIT and Anne Galperin will tell the stories of Ellen and Raskin and Betti Broadwater Haft, two New York-based contemporaries, in their book Baseline Shift, Untold Stories of Women in Graphic Design History. BRIAR is an associate professor of graphic design at Portland State University. She studied at San Francisco State University for her undergraduate degree in graphic design and at the Central St. Martin's in London for her MA in communication design. Her passion is designing for content-driven projects, which started with an interest in museum exhibit design, but eventually led to publishing. She was previously the art director of Bitch magazine, as well as an independent designer of books. BRIAR's feature-length film, Graphic Means, a documentary about graphic design production methods after letterpress and before the desktop computer, released in 2017. She's now focusing her work on helping to expand the design history canon to include lesser heard stories of designers who are or were women and people of color, as well as aspects of design that have previously been considered banal, but which also tell critical stories of design in our cultures at large. Anne is an associate professor of art and graphic design program director at the State University of New York at New Paltz. She's earned a Bachelor of Science in Human Development and Social Policy from Northwestern University and an MFA in 2D design from Cranbrook Academy of Art. Before entering academia, Anne edited and wrote for the Macmillan Publishing Company, was a freelance writer and researcher, and designed books in-house for Chronicle Books. Her body of work includes book designs for alt press, museum, and art book clients, including Four Walls, Eight Windows, OR Books, the Walker Art Center, and distributed art publishers. And now I introduce BRIAR and Anne.
Hello there. I think what we'll do is I'm calling in from Portland, Oregon, and Anne is in New York, and we're going to each give separate presentations about our research topics. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump in and talk about Ellen Raskin. Ellen Raskin was a designer, a letterer, an illustrator, and also an author, but I'm going to focus on her visual work today. As Carol said, I'm a graphic designer, an associate professor, and a design history researcher, and all of these roles interact or intersect, and they really came together for me to produce this book, and I really think of myself as a producer. I edited Baseline Shift, Untold Stories of Women in Graphic Design History. It was officially released 2 days ago, which was really surreal and very exciting. It has 15 essays with writing by 19 scholars, and it tells stories of women in design history that have not been shared widely. And that might be, that's for a number of reasons. As I said, I think of myself as a producer. I originated the concept for the book, and I wrote an essay, and I wrote the introduction. But the book, the meat of the book, is the work of many, many people, and it would not exist without all of these people here. And in fact, this MMS is a collective, so this is 3 people right here. So the editorial approach to the book is based on historian Martha Scotford's concept of messy history. She said, neat history is conventional history, a focus on the mainstream activities and work of individual, usually male designers. Messy history seeks to discover, study, and include the variety of alternative approaches and activities that are often a part of women designers' professional lives. So with this in mind, the book includes essays on women who are known but rarely discussed or given their due, like this one by North Carolina-based professor Tashika Arsenault Sutton about Harlem Renaissance designer, illustrator, and photographer Louise E. Jefferson, as well as essays about anonymous technicians in our industry who work to secure equity and inclusion in the typesetting trade, by Sweden-based design collective MMS. There's another essay about type drafters, so women who worked for Monotype and drafted the type either by hand or later digitally. There are pieces about overt feminists, like this one by Tokyo-based Ian Lynham, which looks at feminist publishing in Japan during the 1970s. And there are a few more pieces about activist designers who worked as allies for movements that they were not necessarily a part of, but they wanted to support, using their typesetting businesses or using their skills to support other movements. And these are the kind of places that you often find women designers in history where they could make work. They may not have even thought of themselves. They probably didn't think of themselves as designers first, but women historically have been very much involved in social movements, and you have to communicate when you're trying to make a change socially, and that happens with whether it's signs or publications. So much of the work happens in these social movements. The suffrage movement is another place. There's an essay about women in the suffrage movement and the work that they made for that. There are also essays that cover the marginalized women of spheres that we know really well, like this piece by Berlin-based Madeline Morley about the one woman we know to come out of the Bauhaus and practice advertising design, Sori Poppets. My own essay starting point was this book, which sat prominently facing out on my living room shelf. I picked it up from a thrift shop. That's a common place that I interact with history, to be honest. I'd never bothered to look at the name of the designer until one of these Twitter challenges where people were posting their favorite book covers. So I went and, the nice thing about books is that they actually list the names of the designers pretty far back, actually. And it turns out that it was the work of illustrator, designer, and author Ellen Raskin. And I was surprised and delighted to see a woman's name on this piece I was so in love with. And, I knew that women were working in the mid-century, but I also knew that a lot of times they weren't getting credit or they were relegated to certain jobs. And I simply did not know a lot of their names. And a lot of this stuff, I had learned in doing research for graphic needs, where, in the mid-century, women were still maybe doing a lot of production work, and not necessarily doing the design work itself and getting their name on a piece. So here are two books with oddly similar compositions, very, stylistically different. You can tell the different eras that they were designed in. They were made 20 years apart. Raskin designed both covers and also wrote and designed the book on the right. And you may recognize The Westing Game. It was and still is a really beloved young adult mystery featuring a spunky heroine, a will, and a kooky group of suspects. Many think it informed the film Knives Out. I don't know if any of you have seen that. And if you're at all invested in this, I've seen that HBO is working on a a series adaptation of the novel, so it's kind of cool. But back to the story. I was interested in exploring her journey between these two, because the Westingame was kind of her kind of masterpiece. This is her auteur piece. She designed, wrote, she designed all the pages, everything about it. Because she was a Newbery Award-winning author for the Westingame, which is for the quote, most distinguished contribution to literature for children, her papers and visual work have been archived at 2 institutions. So that's really valuable. Like when you're working with quote unquote messy history, you don't often get archives to work with. Or if you do, the work is in archives that are, like not graphic design archives. In this case, her work is in children's book archives. So I happened to be taking a cross-country road trip from Virginia to my home in Portland in 2019, and I was able to make a detour to her papers at the University of Michigan. So the second archive, there are GIFs here, but they're not loading. Let me try to go back and see if they'll load. So the second archive her work is held at is the Cooperative Children's Book Center at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I wasn't able to visit that archive, but it was during the pandemic. I was working remotely with the librarians there. They were super helpful, and they helped, they digitized some footage for me. So I was able to watch videos of her being interviewed and giving a talk that I wouldn't be able to see anywhere else. Raskin was trained as a fine artist at the University of Wisconsin, and but as soon as she got to New York, I think she realized, and she was a single mom at the time. She realized she had to make some cash, so she wanted to do commercial art, and she bought herself a little press, and she made some promotional pieces. And so the one on the left is about a moving card, but the ones on the right are these promotional pieces that are a little calendar that she sent out. And she would practice, she came from a printmaking fine art background, but what I find interesting is that she also was practicing making letter forms and working with typography with this press. And she talks about this, about how it helped her learn typography. And from her first promotional piece that she sent out, she won like 3 freelance projects. And she said from then on, she always had work. She was never without work. One led to another. Book covers were her bread and butter in the late 50s and into the 60s. And she said repeatedly, and this is in many interviews, and she said she designed over 1,000 covers in her career. This is her first. Perhaps her most famous book is the first edition of A Wrinkle in Time by Madeline L'Engle in 1962. The type is very clean and modern, and it pairs really well with geometric composition, visualizing the children traveling by tesseract. She also designed L'Engle's 1965 Arm of the Starfish, which was a favorite of mine as a tween. I don't know if any of you have read that. Good one if you have 12-year-olds. So, Raskin learned more of the details of typography and graphic production while working at agencies. Here is an example of one of her paste-up mechanicals from 1965 that shows a more straight-ahead use of serif typography paired with her woodcut style illustrations. So you can see here a detail of the board shows her signature with the illustration corrections to the line work, instructions to the strippers, and of course, pasted typography there on the spine. And she got to sign her work, which illustrators get to do, or got to do. I guess they still can do. And here's the final jacket. So a lot of her work did this, paired a sort of restrained typography with her very energetic illustrations, and it worked really well. She did however, create some conceptual type treatments as well. This book here is a collection of letters written by a Catholic mystic artist, Carol Houselander. And you can see that abstract form behind the letters creates an abstract cross. But I think her most harmonious typography is when she made the lettering herself. It just feels totally in tune with her illustrations. Like they just lock together perfectly, and feel like they were made for each other. Here's another example. She did a few record covers, not too many, but some. And here's some really sweet letters that she did for a book cover. She did a lot of intellectual types of books for university and types of books, and that sort of offers some meaty topics really to work with. Like I said, she often paired a more restrained type treatment with her playful illustrations, but she was definitely looking at the type trends of the day. And here she's created this flared lettering to really integrate with her illustration of this line. And in this, she really loved to experiment with eclectic lockups of typefaces. And it's hard to tell, but each of these lines of type are numbered to sort of denote, probably it's called modes of thought. So maybe denoting the modes of thought. This is a philosophy book. A favorite work of mine is this book. It's called Books, A Book to Begin With. And it's for children to learn about the history of books. And I was so excited when I was at the archives and I saw the original artwork for this. But yeah, the fact that she could work with her sort of old style lettering and then her beautiful illustrations, it worked so well for this book. It was a series. That's why they're called A Book to Begin On. But here you can sort of see the actual layout and then the paste up mechanical. So her, she was she was doing illustration and layout. Here's another example of her lettering pairing so perfectly with her illustration, with this sort of, frankly, a kind of a creepy abstraction, but it does draw you in. After designing and illustrating many books for other people, she felt it was time to create her own books. She had done children's books for other people. Her first book was Nothing Ever Happens on My Block. She created Frankenstein. But you can see, like, with the typefaces that she chose in these, I mean, she's clearly affected by the fact that she's worked with typography in a more commercial or adult space. And she continued to make books, and her books have her work plays with words a lot and has a lot of visual jokes. It's kind of heady in a lot of ways. And so type, I think, type and lettering played a big role, even in her little kids' books. So, I mean, this book on the left, the typography is very, central. The one on the right is, I just like this book. It's not, the typography isn't super central, but it's about a little girl who needs glasses and keeps seeing fantastical things with her poor eyesight. So it shows an outline of something wild, and then you see what it is, and it's something like the postman at the door. She eventually evolved to want to write books for young adults, and when her editor asked her what she was going to illustrate, she kind of panicked because she didn't want to do illustrations. Really, she was hoping they would was kind of evolving to writing, and she wanted the readers to use their imagination. So her solution was to make what she called word pictures or illustrations using the lettering to reflect the characters' personalities. So this is The Mysterious Disappearance of Leon, Noel, which is a classic Ellen Raskin, like, reversing the word, wordplay, and then also, all this lettering. So throughout the book, things are constructed out of letter forms. And then it's just really fun to see her original art here, where she's cleaning up little details. Her YA novel Figs and Phantoms took on a more sort of adult typographic approach, and it was utilized throughout the book for notes and other story details. And they sort of worked like little typographic illustrations, but or sort of bits of ephemera for the kid to discover throughout the book. And she was very deliberate. She knew what she was doing. She was trying to engage the kid. And she loved these mystery concepts. And so like, I was able to sort of see a pretty good picture of her process for Figs and Phantoms in the archive. So I got to see sketches of her various treatments in the book. Obviously the ampersand is a repeating element. I actually happened to see someone online who had a tattoo of that. She said, "This is the tattoo from Figs and Phantoms." And of course, this is, what is it? It's not, someone remind me what this ampersand is from. It's from a well-known typeface. I'm terrible about that. And then I saw like her photocopies, which, by the way, photocopying was hugely important for figuring out sizing, making notes. It was like an interstitial position, in the working process. And then looking at her actual boards. Caslon swash. And then here it is in the book. And so there were these little treats, little breaks throughout the book, which is very nice if you're 12 years old, or if you're 44 years old. Here's another treatment she did for the book, which I enjoy. Here it is in the book. So the essay that I wrote can be seen as a starting point for looking at Raskin's work from a typographic perspective. She has over 1,000 book covers. There's plenty more to explore, and more that pairs in with her sort of writing approach. But this is just sort of a little introduction to Ellen Raskin. And as Carol said, the book, I didn't know that Princeton was doing a deal, so I would go with that. But thank you very much. I'm going to hand it over to Anne.
Hi, everybody. I am going to share my screen. Thank you, Carol, for your introduction. And BRIAR, the talk about Ellen Raskin is so exciting. I so loved seeing the work. So I'm delighted to be presenting this oral history of Betti, Broadwater, Haft here today. And what you said about messy history really resonates with me in terms of this, the process and what's known and what's not known, and the stuff you usually don't hear about in terms of domestic and personal realities and all of that stuff. So I first came to know of Bettyhaft through the photo lettering one-line manual of styles. It's a really hefty tome. You might be familiar with it. My father-in-law gifted it to me when he retired from his career as an ad agency art director. The manual is mind-boggling. It clocks in at about 470 pages. Most of the pages feature 18 samples of type. I had thumbed through it often, but during the summer of 2018, I really noticed, it really hit me that in the list of the 252 designers showcased in the volume, along with Milton Glaser and Bradbury Thompson, there were the names of 12 women. Daisy Alcock, Deborah Ann Bristol, Claudette Cacucciolo, Rael Cowan, Mary Frederick, Sandy Governal, Bettyhaft, Hedda Johnson, Connie Reichel, Shirley Smith, Jean Yi Wang, and Margaret Yakovenko. So I decided to try and find them. Several had died before I began my search, and one I couldn't locate. But I ended up writing to two via snail mail with an invitation to talk and provided my phone number, and Bettyhaft called me back just a few days later. Over the next 3 years, we had several lively conversations about her typeface and her life and design, which actually turned out to be all the same thing. Given her frailty, the distance between our homes and being limited to analog technology and then COVID, I have still not seen the depth and breadth of her portfolio. But we were able to meet in person twice. After a few conversations, she felt comfortable enough, which really surprised me. She invited me to visit her in rehab while she healed from a fall. And some months later, we met at a local Queens diner, and this time she brought some work samples. I found Betty really witty and precise and warm and eloquent. My initial questions were strictly and pretty naively focused on the typeface, but she let me into her dimensional view of history and synchronicities and everything. It was almost biblical. She began at the creation, and then she moved forward. And it was an amazing experience. I am really sad to speak of Betty in the past tense. She died on August 1st of this year, but I do feel really honored to have learned from her, and I'm hoping to be able to continue my research and flesh out her story. So what makes a designer? As Haft described it, it was a love of letter forms, ideas, and meanings. She traced it back to learning to read at her paternal grandma's knee, in Lookout Mountain, Tennessee. She was a January baby. She had missed the kindergarten deadline, so grandma wisely stepped in. Haft's first reading list was eclectic: the King James Bible, the Chattanooga Times, Funny Pages, and Grimm's fairy tales. Betty was really hungry for knowledge. Even as a kid, she sounded as if she was possessed of a sharp and interested eye. In the early 1940s, she and her parents relocated to New York to live with maternal grandparents in Upper Manhattan. Haft found herself a little bit behind in school. When I got to New York, she said, my new classmates had already learned to write cursive, but I hadn't. So I had to pick it up from my friend who was a lefty. I imitated her backward slant. It was very jazzy. She became a real child of the city. She dove into its culture. And like so many New Yorkers of her time, the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the American Museum of Natural History, which later was to be one of her clients, were memorable touchstones. Haft attended Washington Irving High School. She was one of 5,000 girls of diverse backgrounds and nationalities that thronged the 11-story building at 40 Irving Place. The building still stands today. It is still a school. A high-achieving student, she was on the vocational rather than the academic track, and she was always working odd jobs to help out at home. As a high school senior during the McCarthy era, she was affected by the Feinberg Law, which was a New York state law repealed in 1967 that removed individuals who were identified as subversive or communist from the public school system. The law had long and destructive legs. One of her history teachers at Washington Irving was fired. Haft's Regent's history exam score was downgraded because of that, and that disqualified her from receiving a college scholarship. Very fortunately for her, the Workshop School of Advertising and Editorial Art offered one-year scholarships, and Haft was an awardee. The Workshop School was Haft's initiation into design. Her start there in fall 1950 coincided with the steady stream of World War II vets returning to school on the GI Bill. There, she said, I was one of 3 girls in a sea of men. Once at the Workshop School, Haft's persistent handwriting challenges were addressed once and for all in a calligraphy class taught by Paul Standard. Though the class was required, Standard asked the students why they were taking it, which this is something that most educators seem to do. When Haft said, well, I have to, Standard said, well, that's all right, dear, you'll learn. And she did. Creating and working with letter form became Haft's enduring passion. Standard was a staunch mentor. She said, he nagged me until I took the 2 tests to apply to the Cooper Union. Cooper Union had a free night school certificate program. Haft passed both exams. She secured a spot. And during her 3 years at Cooper, she became highly proficient at specifying type and laying out precise comps in the school's print shop. The Haber ruler had just been introduced, and its point, pica, and inch markings made manual type calculations much easier. I learned to be useful on the scene, and I could do everything designed to production, Haft said. No other woman was doing this. If you could set type accurately and quickly, it was a really well-paying job. Type had also become her passion. These are her words from a paper she wrote, most likely toward the end of her courses at Cooper Union. I love letter forms of all kinds and all their manifestations, in books, on street signs, and in store windows, painted ones peeling off walls, chalk ones scribbled on sidewalks, and imposing ones chiseled in stone. I like every aspect of handling the small pieces of type, from picking them out of the case to setting them and pushing them around in ever-changing combinations. I like playing with the little spaces between letters, words, and lines that make up the type form. I like placing the form within the frame and locking it up for printing. I like the sounds of the press and the smell of the ink. I like the feeling of inner satisfaction that comes as a new image emerges from the press. Upon leaving Cooper and entering the workforce, Haft saw that prospects for women designers were largely limited to a ghetto of gendered outlets, including apparel design studios and fashion magazines. There were very few opportunities in design and ad agencies and little genuine interest in supporting emergent female designers. Haft described one job interview in which she ended up having to use her portfolio as a shield, unlocking the office door behind her and fleeing. She got the job offer, replete with a regular assignation with the boss, and she turned it down. Through connections at Cooper, Haft landed a job working at the now defunct pharmaceutical advertising firm William Douglas McAdams, which from the late 1940s onward was owned by Dr. Arthur Sackler. Haft was the assistant art director for Spectrum, a new 8-page Pfizer pharmaceutical advertorial directed at doctors and inserted seamlessly into issues of the Journal of the American Medical Association. I just located these volumes. Nobody is credited on the insert, so I am speculating that perhaps this may be some of Haft's work. The McAdams position was much sought after, but Haft found the office culture to be testosterone-driven and sexist and soon left to pound the pavement. Among other prospects, she reached out to Will Burton's studio, hoping to get an interview. 3 months later, Burton called her in. Haft was convinced of being taught by Paul Standard, along with her interest in typography, created this fortuitous career break. Will really changed my life, she said. He was one of the most ethical people I've ever met, everything you would wish for. He treated me with the utmost respect, and he gave me opportunities. It was an enormous gift. Haft worked at Will Burton Incorporated from 1955 to 1958, the post-World War II moment of accelerated economic growth in the United States. She described a real madman scenario of an advertising industry high on federal tax breaks, in which war dividend technological developments converged with the emigre artists, designers, and photographers for whom modernist was a progressive imperative. Haft was one of several young creatives there. George Klauber, a former student of Burton's at Pratt Institute, managed the studio. His boyfriend, Andy Warhol, was often commissioned to do illustrations. Roman Vishniak freelanced with the studio too, pioneering the use of photomicroscopy for the images he shot for Scope, a magazine for the Upjohn Pharmaceutical Company, which was a major Burton studio account. Other influential figures in the studio included Hilda Burton, Will Burton's first wife, who provided invaluable research assistance, Burton Kramer, Eve Zimmerman, and other staffers who'd come in for 9-month periods on guest visas. The studio's well-earned reputation and prestige clients leveraged a constant stream of groundbreaking projects from both corporations and government agencies. Haft was assigned to make a poster on short notice for United States Information Agency project USia was a government agency doing work that was described as diplomatic. This was to highlight the growth of Kalamazoo, Michigan, where Burton's client Upjohn was headquartered. I had an hour and a half to do it, Haft said. Eve Zimmerman looked at it and verbally tore the lettering apart. He said it was terrible. Zimmerman had been trained to letter with a brush, while Haft was taught to use ruling pens. We had a big discussion about it, and I said, okay, you know so much. Why don't you teach me? So Zimmerman began mentoring her. We would stay behind whenever we had an hour or so, she said. He would give me instructions. We would design an alphabet. In the middle of this, he had to leave because his time in the studio was up. And he said, well, I guess you're going to have to go to Switzerland to study with my teachers. So I want to give credit where credit is due here and thank the RIT Carey Archive and the Will Burton Collection, Amelia Hugo Fontenelle, who was able to get me art for this. And you can see that in the upper right-hand corner of the poster, it says designed by Will Burton. I'm going to describe Haft's path to Switzerland because to me it really speaks about the combination of serendipitous mentorship and the level of Haft's production and design skills and how they came together. Haft met Georgine Ory when the latter came to Burton's studio about an article she was writing for Scope. The women became fast friends. Ory's CV was diverse. She was an art critic, an educator, a staff manager and lecturer at the Guggenheim Museum, an instructor at Parsons School of Design, and coincidentally at that time, the art consultant for the Switzerland-based Geigy Chemical Corporation. Ory suggested that Haft pursue a new position being created at Geigy because the company was in the process of moving its corporate design account in-house to their American headquarters in Ardsley, New York. When Haft got the job, she became the first American to work in Geigy's studio. It was demanding. Haft lived in Queens, worked in Westchester, drove to Manhattan after hours to deliver type specs to the phototypesetter, waited for hours to pick up the galleys for paste up. Then she drove back to Queens to sleep and back to Westchester for the next day work. What kept Haft going, besides her work ethic and the trusty Volkswagen Beetle just purchased and her being a new driver, was the contract she arranged with Geigy stipulating that she would be sent to the company's Basel Design Atelier for 1 year to take a half-time position while attending the Basel School of Design. Unfortunately, I do not have examples of Haft's work from Geigy in Ardsley or Basel or for the class projects from the School of Design. Haft transferred to Switzerland in April 1959. She worked for Geigy and took design classes with Armand Hoffman and Emma Reuter. It was a remarkable experience, doubly because women didn't attend the School of Design. Haft made friends with a few women at work and in class, among them the American designer Barbara Stauffacher-Solomon, who also worked in Geigy's atelier. A few months before Haft left for Switzerland, she'd begun dating Leon Haft, a Bronx-born architect she'd met at a friend's house. To her surprise, Leon kept in touch and soon proposed. And after a whirlwind wedding week back home in Peekskill, New York, Haft brought Leon back to Switzerland for the remainder of the year. Multilingual and possessing architectural and design skills, Leon joined Haft at Geigy. After a honeymoon traveling through Europe, the couple returned to New York. Both Haft and her husband were freelancing, and she often collaborated with him and his clients. Needing type, she reached to Aaron Burns, a friend with whom she'd been working since her Burton studio days. He'd become the director of design and type at the composing room. When Haft mentioned that she felt the impetus to complete the typeface begun with Eve Zimmerman, Burns put Haft in touch with Photo Lettering, which vetted the work and commissioned the project. Haft started in on designing the typeface, but that wasn't the only project she was working on. She and Leon were starting their family. I was working on the alphabet when I went into labor. I had to get as much done as I could. Leon and I shared a big table in our studio, and when the pains got to be acute, I called the obstetrician and I said, I think it's going to be now. And she said to me, hold on, wait until midnight to check into the hospital because they're going to charge you for an extra day, just for those few minutes. And so I continued working. Betty and Leon's daughter, Nina Haft, arrived in summer 1963 at around the same time as Broadwater Haft Grotesque 7 neared completion. The typeface was a condensed and curvaceous, high-waisted, mid-weight sans serif made for film. It was a busy time. The Haft family was preparing to make a move to Cambridge, Massachusetts, so that Leon could accept a position at the Architects Collaborative, the prestigious American firm of which Walter Gropius was senior founding member. Haft enjoyed the camaraderie of her new community, which included other moms and professional colleagues. Photo lettering requested 2 more weights of Haft grotesque, which again had to be hand rendered. I had already figured out how the type was going to be, but I had to figure out the XYZ and draw them, she said. I did that at night. It took about 2 years. The final version included lining and text figures. In photo lettering catalogs, the Haft grotesque family keeps company with several spreads of other condensed and shapely sans serifs, but to me, Haft's work has distinctive verve and style. She would say this is because the design manifested her conviction that calligraphy and typography had something to do with each other. I did a grotesque, she said, that was based on calligraphic thicks and thins. That was its feature. They were teaching that calligraphy was a separate thing from mechanical type. I wanted to bring the two together. Some side notes about the typeface. All 3 weights appear in the 1964 photo lettering alphabet supplement as Broadwater Haft condensed. Broadwater was subsequently dropped from the name. Haft also mentioned that it had been used in a CBS advertisement, and it showed up somewhat frequently by use in the French press. So not the coffee pot, but publications, magazines, and newspapers of the time in France. So I'm hoping that examples of these pieces exist. I would really like to see them. Haft and Leon welcomed their second child, Jamie, in 1966, and Haft raised her 2 little ones and worked on projects for Harvard University and the Architects Collaborative. In 1968, Leon accepted a position in New York, and he and Haft moved their family to Queens. Over the next several years, Haft did freelance design, illustration, and production for various employers, including the American Museum of Natural History, where she developed materials for the Hall of Minerals as it was designed, built, and opened to the public. The top image is a poster that Haft made during her Cambridge years. The bottom image is a poster for a showing of the red balloon at a local Queens school. And she was describing to me how she hand lettered the red balloon on Saturday, March 30th type. All the while, Haft remained friendly with colleagues from her Burton days, among them Bob Hagenhofer, who was one of the former studio managers. When Hagenhofer left a post in the reprographics department at Staten Island Community College, now the College of Staten Island, or CSI, he suggested that Haft interview for his job. She held the position with its 2.5-hour round-trip commute for more than 20 years. At CSI, Haft managed a staff of 10 and designed and ran the in-house production of hundreds of printed artifacts for every facet of CSI's operations. Haft's formal education continued during her tenure at CSI. Based on the quality of her portfolio, in 1979, the Cooper Union upgraded Haft's certificate degree to a BA, and Haft subsequently earned a Master of Liberal Arts degree from CSI. Despite the typical and persistent economic constraints on design of public educational institutions, Haft's work for CSI stands out for its clarity, joyous use of color, and typographic verve. She frequently used her own typeface. You can see it at left. And she drew display type for routine projects. Her work reflected her ethos that no project was too small or too insignificant to deliver both information and delight to the user. Haft's career, or in her words, the way she made a living, spanned 50 years. Looking back on her experience, she noted, "It's not because I was so wonderful a talent, but because I was in the right place at the right time and was able to take advantage of that. Many people were not so lucky. The women who made it had to go through so much. You wonder how they did it. The implications were that they were sleeping with the right people. I get so incensed because I knew many women along the line for whom things didn't go so well. So I think there's something to be said about the women who managed to survive, take care of themselves, and have integrity." With characteristic self-deprecation, Haft summed up her career. "I'm not one of the stars, but I did do a little something along the way." Thank you.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much. I hope everybody else enjoyed it as much as I did. It was really fantastic. Now let's see now. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? I don't see anything in the Q&A.
I answered one technical question.
You did?
Mhm.
Okay.
About Rubylith.
Okay. Oh, I'm seeing so many of our members on. Hi, Lila.
Hello, yes.
Wow, and Jeff. Stephen Coles I saw before. Oh, wow. It's so wonderful to see everybody.
Can I say hi to Nina Haft? I see she's here. Hi, Nina.
She left a comment.
Oh.
Good. Hi, Ann.
Yeah, that was wonderful, Anne.
Nobody wants.
And this is, I guess, if no one has a question, I want to say, especially because Anne's work shows how critical it is to speak in person to someone. Their firsthand stories mean everything, and if you have someone that you're interested in talking to, yes, reach out and when you can, and share that with other people. We want to hear it. I know that, I had the same experience in talking to people for graphic means. One of the people that I interviewed has passed away, and I'm just so glad that I was able to talk to him and hear his story and share it too. And it's, I'm glad that you got to speak with her in person twice.
I agree with you. Over my time now with TDC, it's 38. I'm going on my 39th competition now. I've met so many people, and to have met them and listened to them and experience being with them has left me so enriched. It's just amazing.
We learn a lot. And even if you feel like, oh, I can't put out I'm not going to publish a book or something like that, you can share it on the People's Graphic Design Archive, which I'm also involved with. And I'm a believer in just sharing what you can, or if you just find something that is worth sharing. Maybe it's a letter or correspondence. I don't know. I mean, you never know what you're going to find. So I encourage you to do that. I'm going to share the link.
We're actually celebrating our 75th anniversary, and I'm going through the archives with Doug Klaus, one of our past presidents. And what we're finding is absolutely amazing, and we're hoping to share that in the book. And then on the One Club, we have ideas of another way of sharing. So yes, it's just so much fun going back.
In fact, I should have shared this, but Raskin did get a few TDs, Art Directors Club awards. And those are the kinds of things that, they kind of get forgotten about if they're not really, really big ones, but they may be in some box somewhere. She's probably on some list somewhere. So being a part of those organizations, the critical thing is that they don't get thrown away.
I agree with you. When we had to close our offices, I took all the archives with me. We have other things in storage, but certain paperwork, no, I wouldn't let anybody touch it.
That's good. I mean, even if it eventually gets digitized, which is easier said than done.
Right. No, I agree with you. When you were going through your list of people, you mentioned Jeannie Wang.
Yes.
Yes. And I met Jeannie when I started with the TVC, and I wanted to take her calligraphy class, but we always had the exhibit of the winner's work just when she was starting, and I was always working. I can never stop. So unfortunately, she's gone now, but I wanted to take that class so badly. Oh God, it's so nice to see all those names.
Was she also an illustrator?
I found a reference to her work in a book that had something to do with medicine or biology that I've been trying to get my hands on, because she's got the illustration credit, but I cannot seem to find that book through any kind of interlibrary loan or anything else. Betty Rostoff was one of the authors of that book. It's some science or bio or physiology book, but I would love to see the illustrations.
Yeah.
And there's I think she did quite a lot of work for the Museum of Natural History too.
Yeah.
So there are these gaps in my knowledge. I know she also taught from time to time.
Yeah.
But it's still very open. So I'm really hoping to have the opportunity to continue learning about her.
Well, Janie's on. Thank you so much for this wonderful talk and research. I wonder if you came across any more women that deserve more research.
Well, there are still the other 11 women listed in the Manual of Lettering, and Stephen at the Letterform Archive and I are thinking that maybe I will write a little bit more about them.
That'd be great.
Which would be very, very exciting. So
I believe Stephen is also working with another researcher about women in metal type design, so
Oh my goodness.
further
Wow.
back, which I think are very interesting because that's further back. Maybe he can speak to that if he's still here. Lila says she has a book that Jeannie illustrated. Yes, maybe.
Oh, that's great.
So I'm not totally off my rocker. And there are a lot of women I think that deserve, more coverage that have like shown up, for instance, in the People's Graphic Design Archive. If you do a search for women in design on that archive, you can see some there. And they're, they're just going to keep showing up. The more we're digging, the more we're looking in the less expected places that are not just, maybe in the organization rosters. Maybe they're not in the organization rosters. The problem is we have to be able to see the name, or someone in a family has to know that their mom or grandma did that work, So yeah, I think it will continue to happen. Yeah.
Well, it's wonderful to see everyone's comments. Yes.
Okay, Stephen says, we had a Mellon Research Grant recipient, Bethany Qualls, come to the archive to create a finding guide for women in metal type design found in the collection. We will publish her work soon. I personally couldn't name one woman who designed something for metal type. And that's saying, I can name printers, but yeah.
And remember, everybody, about that 20% discount.
Yeah.
papress.com. And the code is TDC20. You get that 20% discount. And it's only good until the 31st. So after you're out with Halloween, make sure you do that.
Papress.com.
Jeff Kellum correctly identified that it's genes and gender. Yes. Yes. Oh, wow.
Yes.
I would like to save this chat. Oh, man.
Yeah. The other article, the other essay in the book about typography is from Alice Savoy and Fiona Ross about the drafters at Monotype, if that is of interest to you. Yes. And they do go back all the way to metal and up to digital. Yes. So, of course, they've done very thorough research.
Fiona is one of our TDC medalists.
She's
a good friend, and she's on our committee for the Beatrice Ward Scholarship. So very special.
That makes sense. I think there is a way to save the chat.
Yeah, there's Lucy is reminding us that there is. Save Chat button at the lower right of the screen.
Okay.
Oh,
Well, I'd like to say thank you so much. This has been absolutely wonderful. I really enjoyed it. And I'm sure everybody else, you could tell by the chat, enjoyed it. And even our conversation now afterwards has been wonderful. So it's been wonderful seeing you all again, BRIAR and Anne. And I hope I get to see you again. Come visit the TDC when you're in New York, now at the One Club. Okay.
All right. Thank you,
All right,
Carol.
very
thank
best.
you, Carol. Thank you, BRIAR.
Yes. It's
Thank
been
you.
and Anne is a joy to work with if you ever collaborate.
Oh, I love this project and working with you. It's great.
That's great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.